Hello, my name is Hamel Dobbins, and this is Memphis Material, an oral history project chronicling the stories of the visual arts in Memphis, Tennessee. Memphis Material is a podcast celebrating the personal histories, the intimate stories, and the studio practices of some of the people who help shape the creative landscape of our city. These unedited interviews are all recorded at the Memphis Listening Lab, an archival gem located in the majestic Crosstown Concourse in beautiful Midtown Memphis. Now, the website for Memphis Material was designed by the wonderful Brian Dixon. Now, we do not really have sponsors for this show, but if we did, this episode, the second of two interviews recorded with the great Mary K VanGieson that was recorded on April 5th, 2024. Today's episode would be sponsored by good friends that get together and eat food and look at art. So Mary Kay is the first of many interviews that I've done with the members of a collective here called 6 Points. And then so I had lots of questions about 6 Points. Later, I did interviews with the other 5 members of 6 Points, and it was a delight to be able to sit down with Mary K VanGieson and get her story. Again, this interview is the second of 2 interviews that I recorded with Mary K VanGieson. Oh yes, also, so in the last interview that I did with Mary Kay, there was a part where she forgot the name of the artist that she assigned to this one homophobic student, and then that's revealed right at the very beginning because I hate to edit. Anyway, this is the second of 2 interviews with the wonderful Mary K VanGieson. Enjoy the interview. Amendment to this is the second recording, so I wonder if there's some way we just play these back to back, and then that way people know about it, or I'll somehow splice your voice. And then, so you had this student who was a baseball player,
Exactly.
who you don't remember their name, but they were a baseball player, and they were doing a presentation on an artist, and it was
that I had assigned.
that you had assigned. And
Should have known better.
you should have known better because...
He was homophobic.
And David Hockney was
Gay.
David Hockney.
David Hockney. And,
Great.
and he was out as a gay person.
And I'll just take that little tiny bit, that little bit of voice, and I'll insert it over, and it'll be like, and then I gave them this student, David Hockney, who they were looking at. It'll be totally fine. And then what was the name? I'm trying to think of the stuff that you mentioned in the text. What was the name of the student who works for the bug company, and the bug company is actually...
So it's AAA pest control.
Yes.
And what I was trying to say was that I kept in touch with former students, but I kind of mumbled around about that, and I said AAA and bugs, and that was a total mess. But as the result of, he has a contract on my house, and he always says it's complimentary, teacher appreciation, complimentary. And I said one time, well, you're not going to be rich and famous this way. Oh, he says, no big deal. But it is kind of a big deal to have a whole free all the time.
That's really nice.
I know.
You must be a good teacher.
Apparently, I'm good in the pest control area. I don't know.
So, thinking about, I know now I'm doing it. Thinking about one of the questions that I had, because I listened to it this morning.
Okay.
I know you listened to it right after, because you sent me this text not long after I sent you the link. But I was listening to it this morning, and a couple of times you did mention how conservative Oklahoma was when you were there. Was that one of those things where this is present day Mary Kay looking back on that? You recognize that it was conservative, or did you recognize that in the moment while you were there?
Young, I didn't know any different. Went to school and came home, and mom and dad and the whole thing. Later on, though, in high school, I realized. And then in college, of course I realized, because, no nude models, just lots of things were not as out there in the art world as one might think. by that time, I had lots of art friends and, so forth. But so
That sounds good. And so our last time when we met, or the last things that we talked about, or when we got there. Yeah, it's okay. Don't worry about it. When you made that decision to go back to school, talk to me a little bit about the environment, because I remember in our last conversation you talked about how you were going to have to be part-time because you were working full-time at Germantown at the time, and by then you had had in a number of years. How many years had you been teaching at that point at Germantown, ballparky?
15 or better.
Okay. And then before that you had Kirby, and before that you had several other things. And so you made this decision to go back to school. Now at this point, were both of your children grown and sort of out of the house?
They weren't out of the house, but they were both grown.
Okay.
So, my daughter graduated in 2000, as did I. My son graduated 3 years earlier. So.
And what was their response to Mom going back to school?
Oh, that was fine.
Yeah.
That was, whatever Mom wants to do. I mean, it wasn't the first time that I'd done something that others might have thought was strange,
right,
or unique or whatever. And my husband was fine with it too. I mean, I was paying my way, so.
And I remember as we were leaving last time, I was telling you about that Nell Irvin Painter book, Olden Art School. Did you have that? Did you know about this book when you were in art school? When was it? I can't remember when it came out. Not too long ago, maybe.
So it's been 2 or 3 or 4 years ago when I read it.
Right.
But I have it at home.
Yeah, it's a great book.
It is a great book.
Yeah, and she reads it on audiobook.
Oh, does she?
Yeah, it's really good.
So I read it. I don't know where I found out about that book, but I thought, Old at Art School, that might be me. Maybe I should read that book. So it was good. It was good. I enjoyed it. And it very relatable.
And that's sort of a great backwards segue into going to grad school. And so you decided to go back to grad school, or go back to school,
right?
For grad school there at U of M. And you mentioned last time that you had thought about MCA because they had been really good to you and your students, but then they were averse to the idea of you coming back part-time. And so I'm just curious, what was the re-entry into the other side of the academic life like for you?
It was difficult. It was. I mean, people were nice and whatever, but I'd been out of the classroom as far as me taking classes and so forth 3 years and years and years. My background in art history was pretty sketchy. You might remember that I didn't learn a whole lot of art history in undergraduate. I'd kept up because I'd done my own research in certain areas. But you tend just to go to the areas you particularly like, not the whole big picture. So that was different. Because I wasn't there every single day, I didn't get the whole college classroom kind of experience. I was pretty much a loner in my studio, which, by the way, U of M has wonderful painting studios. That was nice.
And so you weren't taking classes full-time. You were mostly there at night after school was over. What kind of classes were you taking at first?
So I took 3 classes the first summer. I took an independent study kind of class where I had a mentor that came in and said, paint, 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 and then left. And then I think the second summer was either art history or Photoshop. The Photoshop class, I sat down at the computer. I didn't even know how to turn it on. So this very young woman that was sitting next to me, I said, "How do you turn it on?" And she pressed a button. I mean, I knew nothing, absolutely nothing. Now, computers that was early stage computers, so maybe I wasn't quite as far behind. And the first little quiz we had on Photoshop, I just totally bombed it. I mean, it was awful. And I told the instructor, I said, "I don't think I'm in the right class." He said, "Really?" Well, apparently everybody else had done as badly as I had. So we all chugged ahead along together, and it was a good class. I used those thoughts today. So,
Now, who was teaching that class?
Simpkins.
And then what about who was doing the painting independent study with you?
That was Larry Edwards.
Okay. And then just what was that like?
He was pretty harsh. Truth be known, yeah. He wasn't very appreciative of what I was doing. And at that time I was on probation. I didn't know I was. I don't know. I was so naive. I thought if you paid your money and, you took classes, you were in. But apparently I was a probationary student and I had to be recommended. And had I known that, I would have been really worried because I was kind of sure he wasn't going to recommend me, but he did.
And you were over there painting. What kind of paintings, what kind of things were you making when you came back to school in 96?
Very abstract, very abstract. Acrylics. I remember one time, so I think his method of making somebody work, so back up a little bit. So I'd been teaching for years and years. High school, elementary, the whole 9 yards. And high school students, you come in, you have, a method, you teach them the techniques, you teach them, the whole thing. We're talking about line, this is what a line is, blah, 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 whatever. Here's the vocabulary. Now you create something or other. And then I would go around and monitor and, that kind of thing. And they would turn in their project and that would be graded. Well, I discovered in graduate school, you don't do that, apparently. So I was given very little direction. It was kind of like, okay, you're an artist now, emote or whatever.
Now what was the time between undergrad and grad?
Oh, I don't know. You'd have to do the math. I entered 95.
Okay, and then
I graduated in 66.
Okay, so
a lot.
A good 30 years.
Oh,
okay.
yeah.
Now, even though, your undergraduate experience could have been anything, but with a 30-year downtime, of course, the reentry is traumatic, to say the least. And so when you were, and then also, if I remember right, when you finished at Oklahoma State, you initially were in the art department or the art program, but then switched to art ed.
Art ed, right.
And so you probably did not have that senior capstone class like we would have in the BFA, where they are kind of self-driven and they come up with their own project. And so you kind of missed that too.
I'm not sure how much there was of that,
right.
But I missed it. I mean, that last year.
Okay, so there was a huge...
I did student teaching, and I had those crazy education classes that pretty much I didn't like, and, did student teaching and then walked across the stage and got my diploma.
Right. So there was a massive disconnect, obviously.
Oh, yes.
And so then you come in and you have these two experiences. One, the independent study with Larry, and then not that same semester, but that was actually later. So your first semester was just the independent study with Larry?
No, it was 3 classes.
Okay.
So the independent study and then Photoshop and then an art history class. Dick Knowles taught that. Now I learned a lot in that. Oh my goodness.
Okay, what was going on with Dick's class?
We had there was lectures and there were slides. We were still using slides then. And so a lot of talk about this, who influenced and why, and how this, did the certain whatever art was going on at the time. And there was a whole range. Mostly more contemporary. So it was contemporary works, which was good because I really liked that.
And I remember you were saying that you had done some research on your own.
Oh, yes.
And then, but once you came back to school, what were some things that you were seeing in those early grad school art history classes that were particularly exciting for you?
Well, there were a lot more women artists represented, which had next to nothing. Actually, nothing. Mary Cassatt, that's the only one I remember from undergraduate. And that was she and Rosa Bonheur, those were the only 2 in the book, women. Right. So now we had a lot. And I really enjoyed learning about them. And of course, there are a lot of guys too that I enjoyed.
Yeah. And you were there as a painter,
I was.
thinking about yourself as a painter. Were there? I mean, for me, one of the things that was super exciting about grad school was being exposed to so many different things, and I had a kind of an idea of what I was or who I was. But then when you see all these other things, it's like all these other toys are kind of laying out, and you kind of want to play with them. Were there things that were exciting for you in that first bit of grad school that were not even on your radar before? And if so, what?
Exciting. It was really different. Now you had to remember that I was going after my classes finished at Germantown High School. So it was nights, but mostly it was all weekend. So I was there all day Sunday, all day Saturday. And that's when I did most of the work. Now, was there anybody in the studio next to me? Nope. They were off doing weekend stuff. So I didn't have too much interaction with other people. It depended on what class I was taking, because there was a 20th century problems class that I took a couple times, 2 or 3 times, and that was a classroom situation. The Photoshop was a classroom situation, as was the art history class. Those were also, there was interaction with the other people, and that was good. Now, periodically we had, I don't know, critiques. So all the instructors would come into your studio and shoot at your paintings, encourage you to do better, something like that. And at the same time, I would see in other people's studios what was going on with them. And of course, I had a studio mate. It changed a lot. I had a lot of studio mates over the years. So I would see what that person was doing too. But the thing is, I didn't have that same, I was going part-time. I didn't have that same experience that other people that were going full-time might have had. So it was a little isolating, which wasn't bad for me.
Right. I mean, I would imagine after so much interaction at school, at
high school,
in your job school,
right,
that being at U of M on your own might be kind of almost like a solace of some kind.
It was. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed that.
Now, when you were talking about the other professors that were coming in, who was it that you felt like you received good information from, and who was it that you felt like you maybe responded to or connected with in terms of thinking about your time at U of M?
Dick Knowles was definitely, I mean, he became my advisor. I don't know his title at that point, but Larry Edwards, I was just with him that first summer for that class. And then Larry, Dick took over. So Dick and I might have been about the same age, maybe he's maybe a little older, but we all also had that background of teaching and so forth. So we talked about teaching and students and then the work, and I admired his work, and he was really good for me. He was really good. So set me off in a good direction, I think.
In what ways?
Well, first of all, I think he appreciated what I was doing as a non-traditional student, which I was. I was older than almost anybody in any class ever, almost. But then, he had all that historical background that he could, bring up and talk about, and I could relate to, and then I could go study those people on my own. It was good. It was good.
And, I mean, for me, one of the things I really liked about having Dick as a teacher, it was really funny. He was such a good person to, when you were excited, he was a really good person to talk to you about being excited.
Right.
And he was a really good teacher in the sense that he was very intuitive, kind of like when you were talking about taking classes before. I mean, that methodology of your teachers in undergrad was pretty close to Dick's for me in undergrad.
Yeah.
He was like, well, you have a 4 foot by 4 foot surface, here are the paints, you go ahead and cover them.
Right.
And then he would leave and go smoke, and then come back, and then he would say, "Okay, great, we're done for the day." And then we'd come back the next time, and then we'd take that surface and cut it, and then we'd reproduce like one little tiny bit of it, as a larger painting. And so it was like, oh yeah, okay, and it was all very big, and it was all very intuitive. But I mean, I think no one said anything about medium or how you're supposed to do certain things, or
there wasn't too much in the way of technique.
Yeah, there was none of that as far as that undergrad. But,
so I remember Dick saying one time, because I had done some work in acrylic, but then working in oils too, and he said, "Oh, you can paint." I said, "Oh, all right, good." So I could move the paint around.
P.S. That is such a Dick thing to say. You know what I'm saying? Like, that was, like, when you said that, I wasn't like, oh my God, that's crazy. In my brain, I was like, that is totally what Dick Knowles would say. Oh, you could paint.
So it was kind of the whole experience. Now, I was there 5 years. So I had kind of an overview that was different than other people's. First of all, it was more isolated. But then I was there for a really long time. People kept saying, "Are you still around? Are you still?" Like, how many classes have you failed? Are you just going to be here forever? But so those critiques at the end of the semester and so forth, all the professors would pile in and look around the room. And and then we did these in between things where you brought a piece of work and you set it up and everybody looked at it and commented on it too. So there was the end of semester critique, maybe mid-semester too. But then these other just kind of random critiques. I got the idea between a couple of people that the big push was to see if you could make somebody cry. Truly. And I saw that happen several times. I mean, people would just run out of the room bawling. And I vowed that they were never going to see me cry. So but I thought that was, so I called them on it one time. Somebody said in a critique, well, you just might as well go back to being a high school teacher. And I blew it. I said, "You're all teachers. And as far as I'm concerned, you're not doing a very good job." I said, "What? You're not teaching me anything. All you're doing is yelling at me or this or that or the other." Well, then they laid off. So maybe they were waiting for me to emote, whatever. But I thought that was really interesting because in my way of thinking, teaching was to, something concrete perhaps that somebody could see and make it their own, as opposed to do whatever you want. But then I'm going to yell at you if you don't do it right.
Right.
So that was weird. And there's a saying that is something like, high school teachers teach students, college professors teach artists. So at my high school, not everybody was sure that I was a valid teacher. I was the art teacher. That's not the same as the math or the science or the English teacher. Totally different. Those are so here you are, the art teacher, way out in left field to begin with. But then at the college campus, graduate school, I wasn't really an artist. I was that high school teacher that had come back to, paint and dabble around. So I didn't know where I belonged, actually, at that point. It was weird. I got past it.
Well, how did you get past it?
Well, because I had to. If I was going to let them dictate my life, in a certain way, that was ridiculous because I felt I knew what I wanted to do. And I did learn, and I'm not saying that there wasn't anybody who was supportive. They were.
Right.
Although Greeley Myatt was a big influence, and I never had a class with him, ever, because that was sculpture, see, and I was a painter, so. But I won, I don't know, there was a purchase prize that my work of art was purchased in one of those shows, whatever, graduate school shows. Anyway, And there was a hefty prize, money prize connected with it, and I was most pleased. And Grilly said, because here I'd done a sculptural kind of thing to win that prize from my painting, and he said, "You'll just probably go out and spend that money on paint," which was funny.
Also a totally Greeley thing to say.
Yes.
Yeah. And so when you were there, you were talking before about seeing things in the classes with Dick Knowles. What about some of the conversations that would happen in those classes? Was it one of those things where, because I never had Dick for an art history class.
Okay, art history, but so I didn't have a class with him, like a painting class with him. He just came in and we chatted about my work, and then he left.
Oh, okay.
So I never had a class where there were other people.
Okay. Well, I know that if I remember right, at some point he did teach some of those contemporary art classes. Okay.
But maybe those were undergraduate.
Yeah. Maybe. I'm sorry. Yeah. Okay. I got you. Okay. And so, what about art history classes at U of M? Were you taking art history classes there too, in addition to the studio?
One. Just that one.
Yeah.
And that was good that it came at the first, that summer when I was still a probationary student, which I didn't know. It was good that I had that then, because then I had all these resources to have learned about, to follow up on, to research and so forth for my own work. So that was really good that I had it then, as opposed to 3 years in.
Mm-hmm.
So
now, how were you doing in terms of navigating the time and your headspace and compartmentalizing? I mean, because like you were saying, you're still married, you have children,
2 kids.
You have a job, you I'm sure have a yard or something else to take care of, and so but there's all this stuff.
Oh yeah,
and so
life.
How? Because that is
it was
massive.
hard. It was hard.
Yeah.
It was hard.
How did you navigate it?
My husband was he worked out of our home. He's a photographer. He worked out of our home. Some days he was really, really busy. Some days he was just hanging out. Now, I don't think he ever spontaneously swept a floor, actually, but he did a lot of the cooking and so forth. And the kids were on their own. They had all kinds of projects and so forth. So I really didn't have to deal too much with the three of them. And when I was home, a lot of time my mind was always thinking about art, but then I had to prepare for my classes that I was, because that was my job, which afforded me to go to graduate school. So it was important that I did that kind of thing well too. One of the things that I know for a fact, and the kids counted on, every time I learned something new in graduate school, a new artist, a new technique, a new whatever, I brought it right back to my high school students and taught them. And they would kind of roll their eyes. Oh my gosh, she's learned something new. Here now we have to listen to her newest favorite artist or whatever. But they were really good about that. And that was probably really good for them, that I was learning all this stuff that I was taking back to their classroom. So.
And who were some of the people that you were taking back to your class? I remember last time you mentioned Lee Bontecu and Eva Hesse and Kiki Smith. Were there some others that were?
Ai Weiwei. I'm never sure if I say his name right.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Yeah. Just a whole slew of people, actually, that would come up, or somebody would come to campus. Suko came to campus one time. And I think my daughter and I both went to her little talk. And she had some prints for sale for $25. I thought, give me one right now, So then the next day, or one day soon after, because she was on campus for several days, she came to all the studios. Well, she was kind of harsh in her critiques of some people's work, because she's kind of blunt and forthright. And her work is that way also. So one of the professors, we can just have her skip you if you want to. And I said, no, I want to hear what she says about my work. Well, she came into my work and she loved it. I was doing a lot of work on domestic violence at the time. So we had quite a conversation over, how to go forward and what I might decide to do next and so forth, which pleased me a lot because I'd gotten some guff from all these male instructors. And here was Sue Coe, an artist I respected, and I felt that they did too, who said, oh, Mary Kay, you're doing a nice job. That was pleasing to me.
Now, another thing that I really loved about grad school, and it sounds like your grad school experience was longer even, was that you're able to, when you get to school, have this sort of set of ideas, and this is usually the way I tell my new grad students, is like, usually people come in first semester, they kind of do the stuff that they were doing before, and then they realize that they need to break it apart and rebuild it using all of these new things that they have.
Right.
And then, especially in a 3-year program, then usually people will make stuff for a semester. Right, exactly, 5 years. And so usually people will make it and then break it apart again and put it back together again, and it's particularly strong, I think. And so what were some of the things that you were thinking about or that were on your mind? I mean, you mentioned the domestic violence when you met with Sue Coe, but what were some other things that were going on in your work at the time when you came back to school?
I was doing quite a bit of figurative work. So sometimes I used myself as a model. Sometimes, there were nude studies that I used from those classes that I took my students to. And that was a departure because, as you might remember from undergraduate, it was all abstract expressionist stuff. We didn't do many figures and so forth. So that was that. And I started using text on my work too, which I had never done before. It was kind of a thing. I discovered the grid, just like everybody in the whole world discovers. Finally, Agnes Martin, yes, the grid. So that was, I liked that. Just the freedom to do whatever, because it had been such a long time since I'd been an undergraduate. None of those things that I did as an undergraduate did I really feel were viable, as a grad student in the 90s, late 90s.
Because in the late 90s, were there things that were happening in terms of contemporary work that were like sort of strong undercurrents that you could see in some of your classmates? Like, for example, one of the things that you mentioned last time was multiples, and that was such a powerful thing.
Right.
I remember when I was at school at the U of M in the late 80s and early 90s, that was sort of when a lot of that Katharina Fritsch, a lot of those sort of, the more of these you have, the better the piece is, And
series. Everybody works in series.
Or there's just a lot of them.
A lot of them.
There's a huge pile of them.
Right.
Which is totally fine.
True.
But
I still kind of do that.
were there some other things that were going on in terms of, like, things that were happening in that time that were popping up in your work?
I don't know that I remember anything specifically. I do know that I was more aware of galleries in town, and I would go to openings and so forth, which I had not done before. Mm-hmm. So whoever was being shown at David Lusk or El Ross, I don't know when the El Ross was, but those kinds of galleries, yeah, I would seek those out.
And were there people making work that you responded strongly to?
Yes, but we've probably already talked about those folks.
Okay, I got you. That's cool.
Yeah.
All right, so let's see. So back to grad school. So you were talking about how you were thinking about text had entered the work, and then in my brain also, there's also this really wonderful moment where people just start tearing stuff apart and just making the weirdest stuff in grad school.
Right.
What were some things that you were kind of processing and kind of thinking about in terms of the things that you were making in grad school?
So a lot of my paintings were large. I discovered that I could get in my little Toyota Tercel. I could get 6 4x6 paintings in the back of that car.
Wow.
I know. It was an awesome car. And that's what I was doing, 4x6, a lot of 4x6 foot paintings, So nothing tiny, pretty good size. A lot of more acrylic. I kind of wasn't doing much in the way of oil paints at that time, so acrylic. Now, when I started on my thesis, you could, maybe because I was part-time, I had the whole year to work on my thesis project. And it took me the whole year. So that last year, that's what I did. And it was mostly three-dimensional, which Greeley said, "So, Mary Kay, you do know that these are sculptures, right?" So I had 225 hanging hearts in the gallery, and there were 5 paintings on drop cloth canvas affixed to the wall around in the gallery that Greeley called those noise, but I mean they were paintings of hearts and ventricles and stuff, all kind of dark and gloomy actually.
And then, just to get all therapist on you, why do you think that stuff was so dark and gloomy?
Oh, because the subject was. So, one of the things about being an art teacher in a high school setting or, middle school, is that you learn to do a lot of things, because you're teaching all this. You're teaching calligraphy, and you're teaching perspective, and you're teaching painting, and you're teaching drawing, and you start the figure and the printmaking and pottery. I mean, you do it all. So I found in my own work, it was hard for me to focus. I'd start off like this, and then I'd see a bright, shiny object over to the right, and I'd start doing that, and then there'd be another bright, shiny object, so I lacked focus for a long time. Still have a tendency to run off in all directions. But in graduate school, I learned that I really needed to focus. So I needed to find something that I could build my art around. And I finally decided on the heart. And it kind of came about as the result of a friend of mine was very sick. I went to visit her in the hospital. I'm not a big fan of hospitals. As I went up to her floor to visit her, there were all these machines all over the place, all making noise and whatever, and beep, beep, and all this kind of things, and hooked all up. And so then I started wondering, how do you tell the difference between the human person and the machine? How are they connected? And then I did all this research on hearts and artificial hearts and what they can do with all that. It's amazing, actually. Go in and replace it, but not just that. They can go add on or make a sling for your heart or whatever needs to be done. So I decided that the heart was going to be my object. So I started exploring all that kind of, first in painting. I was first doing a lot of paintings about hearts, and then I gravitated to the three-dimensional object. So.
And what was it that you felt like the three-dimensional object would give you that the paintings would not?
Well, I was using paper to construct these objects. So these hearts that were hanging were made out of dress pattern tissue, collaged. They were empty. That I had a model, and I put the paper on, and then I cut it and took that inner out, and then I sewed it back together. So my hearts had been repaired. They were stitched. And then those were all hanging. So I made a lot of them. So that was that multiple thing. Mm-hmm. That was that one object, which individually they were kind of different, but taken as a group, they looked. So it was a bank of hearts. And it was kind of moody, because that whole body aspect is kind of mysterious, and in my friend's case, it was kind of a death sentence for her. But I didn't think of the work as being really depressing. It just was what it was, you know. So I enjoyed doing all those hearts, which is kind of a obsessive kind of thing, which I found out about myself, that I'm more obsessive than I realized.
But also the thing that you were saying about there was a kind of pleasure in building or making these things that was not necessarily present in the painting.
Right.
And then all of those great things that you talked about in terms of thinking about the metaphor of the material nuances, you know, the kind of materials that you were using to make these things. Now, you've mentioned, you know, the length of your time in grad school being longer than normal. Were there people in your cohort or cohorts that you were particularly close to there at U of M?
Not really. But I mean, I met a lot of people that I saw then outside class. So, you know, a whole group of folks would have a party and I would be invited. I would go. So a lot of people that are working in the arts in Memphis right now are people that I met during graduate school, you being one of them. I don't know that you were in graduate school at the time. I was, but I first met you when I was in graduate school.
That sounds right. I think while you were in grad school, I was also in grad school.
Okay, I wasn't. I don't know.
Yeah, and then I came back.
Right.
And I think that
right.
that was probably the
right.
connection. And so, because I think of you as someone who is particularly social, like at the openings and at the lectures and all of these things. And then also, you know, it seems like everyone knows you, and then you know just about everyone. Are there other things that you wanted to add in terms of thinking about the grad school experience at U of M?
It was kind of interesting at one point because I was making all these three-dimensional objects, and I do gravitate toward objects more so now than I did then. But I mean, I'm an object maker more than a painter. But I remember one time I had all these hearts, and one of the professors came into my studio and kind of just wondered aloud, "Oh, you should cast these in bronze instead of paper," because it was collaged. I mean, it was like paper mache, but with dress pattern tissue, which was a feminist kind of thing to do in the first place, and paper and ephemeral and, you know, that kind of thing. And I said, "Why would I do that? Why would I cast it in bronze?" Well, I think the idea was, in his mind, was that it would be more permanent. I said, "But paper's been around forever, so I don't really need to cast these things in bronze, and it would have a whole nother meaning if they couldn't sway in the breeze, you know." So that was just kind of interesting. And I do like paper a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it's super appropriate. I mean, I can understand the connection between the two. I mean, it's almost like that. In grad school, they say, you know, make it bigger, it'll make it better,
Right.
But I like
take
this,
something and change it it again.
But I like this
Jasper
idea.
Johns kind of thing.
You take something and you make it into bronze.
Right.
Maybe that'll be my new bigger is better.
I also thought maybe more appropriate if I were to be able to cast it in glass. Now that might be, but I didn't have the resources to do that. So.
And while you're doing this, I mean, you're in school for such a long period of time. You're teaching at the same time, and you were talking about you would come in and you would have some new artist that you wanted to talk to the students about, which to me is, I mean, that's one of the reasons I love teaching, is that if I'm super excited about somebody, then if I can't work it into a explanation of a project, then I'll just show it to them.
Exactly.
And so I'm curious, what do you think are some ways that your teaching changed after the grad school experience?
Oh, I definitely think it changed.
Mm-hmm.
I was more aware of different cultural aspects of art, you know, before I'd been European based. But then I finally realized that there were other cultures that were growing at the same time, and why don't we talk about them? So there was that. And art history was a big thing that I included in every assignment that I gave. There was always that art history kind of component, but more contemporary artists too. So, you know.
And after you finished with grad school, how much additional time did you have before you retired from Germantown?
I graduated in 2000. I retired in 2006.
Okay.
So, you know, I think I told you before that some teacher friends were totally dismayed and confused as to why I was doing this. It was going to take such a long time. It was going to cost more money. You can get your master's in art education so much quicker and easier. Not easier as far as I was concerned, but because you'd have to take all those classes where you took notes and carried on, you know. I didn't want to do that. But since it took me all that time, then I had time to take that information back to my classes. So then when I graduated, I did get a bump in my pay. Now it's a terminal degree, so I didn't get the doctor's pay, but which irritated me. But but then your retirement is based on the last, I don't know, 5-6 years or whatever you were teaching. So I did have that. That helped with my retirement pay later. So that I had not planned to retire when I did, but that's what happened. So.
And how did you know it was time to retire?
My husband died in 2004. Very sudden, massive heart attack. He wasn't sick. I was out of town. He had gone to the doctor for just a follow-up, the stress test, the treadmill stress test, and he died on the machine. Yeah, and within seconds. So when I left, he dropped me off at the airport. I was going to a residency at Kansas City Art Institute, and I said, "I'll see you Saturday. Don't forget to pick me up." And then that was that. So that was a big trauma in my life. He was 64. I'm 4 years younger. We hadn't made plans. The kids and I mean, that was a big to-do. I mean, really a big trauma. I didn't know what to do. We didn't have wills. We didn't have any of that stuff. We hadn't prepared. You know, we'll think about it another day. Well, now it's another day, and we didn't ever think about it. So, well, we worked through that. And when I went back to school, so he died in the summer, and that fall I was back at school. Finally, I wondered to myself, how many more of these plays? I think I told you that the fine arts department or the visual arts department was heavy into those plays. And that's why we got some extra perks every now and then. We didn't get money. We were never paid for that extra time. So in addition to all the teaching requirements, I was also involved in staying nights late to work on the sets for the play. So, but we didn't get money for that, but we did get, so I was able to afford the printing press because they owed me. I mean, nobody ever said that. I just say, yeah, I really need a printing press. You know, my students do. Okay, Mary Kay, we can work that out. So, you know, I could do those kinds of things. But I thought to myself at this point in 2006, I thought, how many more plays do I have in me? And I decided I didn't have any at all. So I made an appointment with the retirement counselor in Nashville, drove there, chatted with her. She did a whole bunch of figures and so forth, because I figured my budget back and forth, and she pushed a paper over to me, and she said, "Do you think you could live on that?" And I said, "I believe I can." So I went home and wrote a letter of resignation right that minute. So I retired in 2006, and it was time. Yeah.
And that's a massive shift. I mean, I have a lot of friends who weren't high school teachers who retired, but who were college teachers who've retired, and it was a real difficult transition for them. What about for you?
No. It was like a paid vacation. Oh my gosh. You could do anything you wanted to. I told myself early on, I said, I'm not going to do anything that I don't want to do. And pretty much have stuck to that. So as soon as you retire, people immediately think you don't have anything to do, so they want you teach this little class. It'll be for free, but just think how much fun you'll have, or do this, or do that, or do the other thing. And I had told myself, unless I really wanted to do it, I was going to say no. And I was pretty good about doing that, still am. So I didn't have too much of that going on, but then now I could make my own art, you know. The kids were both out of the house, going off doing their own thing. Paul had died. I had the whole big house to myself, me and the cats, and I had room to do my artwork in the house. So I did.
Now, what kind of things were you making when you retired?
Oh, let's see. Probably more of the same for a while. You know, there were lots of three-dimensional kinds of things, and then I was going to a lot of openings and a lot of, you know, I hung out a lot with a lot of art people and doing that kind of thing. I was also traveling. A friend and I began traveling. Every year we'd go someplace. We went to Spain, we went to Italy, we went to France, a lot of places. And then here in the United States too. And I had a group of friends three other friends that I had known through one of the residencies that I took in Chicago. And we got together either to go to the National Honor Society convention or just a workshop on our own. So we would meet and do those kinds of things, that was great fun. That was great fun. And then sometimes I would learn printmaking process that I could bring back, and I got myself a little press for the house and the mat cutter and all those things I was missing from school.
Mm-hmm. And so you mentioned the residencies. Mm-hmm. You mentioned one in Kansas City and then another one in Chicago.
Upstate New York, Skidmore College.
Now, what were these?
They were basically for art teachers, and I think the idea was, you come to our place, we will let you have a studio space to do your own work. We will feed you, we will house you. You can stay for a month. And maybe when you get home, you will tell your students about our program and send them our way. Mm. Pretty sure that was the reason for that. Maybe not entirely, but it was great. I mean, it was great because nobody had ever offered me that kind of, as a teacher, nobody had ever offered me that kind of thing. So upstate New York, Skidmore College, perfect. Then I thought, let's do this again. So I went to Chicago for 2 weeks, the Chicago Art Institute. And then there was Minneapolis. That was a month-long thing too. And then I had been accepted and was at the Kansas City Art Institute when my husband died. So I didn't finish that residency, but those were wonderful.
Mm-hmm. And with those, was there a lot of connections to other people who grew out of those?
Right. The one in Chicago, and I do love Chicago, that's where I met these three friends, and we call ourselves the slow walkers. I'm pretty sure I was the slowest walker of all of us, but there was a whole group of young people that was in this group, so they'd say, we're all going to go to dinner. It's just a few blocks down the way, which turned out to be 10 or 20 blocks. Just, we'll all go together. We don't need to get a cab or anything. We'll just, well, pretty soon they'd charged ahead, and here I was lagging behind. Well, these three other women lagged behind also. And could be that they weren't running like the rest of these people were. Could be, or maybe they were just kind to me. I don't know. But these are the people that I saw then, for years after. Actually, we're getting together in the next year or so to do another workshop. But so it's been since 2001, 2002, since these people and I have our slow walker group have been active. So.
And also, like, before we totally leave high school, were you the only art teacher there at Germantown?
There were, well, depending on the year. Sometimes there were 3, sometimes there were 4. At one point, I was the department chair, the visual art department chair. There was a fine arts department chair that was overseeing all the stuff too. But there were 4 of us generally. The population would shift, so somebody'd leave and somebody'd come back in. But there for a while, we'd have a new influx of. It was a hard job. It was a hard job, particularly with those plays and what you had to be involved with at that. So people would come and they would go again. So I would be the one instruct. Okay, this is how we do. This is what we need to do. You need to be sure and tell your students. Blah blah blah. That kind of thing. So.
Mm-hmm. And was that I mean, I know for some high school teachers, there's a kind of almost like a military, like camaraderie that's formed, because the circumstances are so extreme. Was that one of the things that happened with you and the people that you worked with, or was it more like, oh, well, I do this and they do that?
So we were pretty helpful toward one another. It was, okay, let's get through this the best way we can. This is how we need to do things. Be aware. When I retired, the woman that was the fine arts department chair before me came back to organize for my retirement party, and she said, okay, Mary Kay, do you want high tea? I said, high tea? No. I said, let's get all the people that I worked with over all these years at Germantown High School, all those art teachers, let's all go out and have dinner together. And so we did. And there were like 28 people that I had worked with over the 20 years at Germantown High School. So that was really fun to see those people because I'd kept in touch with everybody. So.
Now, who were some of the people that were particularly important for you working there?
At Germantown. Mm-hmm. Well, Alma Zent, she was the head of the department when I first joined, and she impressed upon everybody the Germantown way of doing things. So, I didn't always see eye to eye with that, but she was instrumental in whatever was going on. And then after a while, I sort of took her place when she left, and I took her place, and I guess people were looking to me for the Germantown way, whatever that means.
And, all right, so let me think. Okay, so you went through there. Well, I'm curious. So I also know that you work with a group now, and then I know that other groups and other friendships have been really important to you. Right. I mean, for me, when I think about you, I think about you're there. I can always sort of count on Mary Kay being there. Mm-hmm. And it also seems like you have a really strong, your friendships that you have are strong and deep. Does that sound right?
I think so.
Okay.
I think so. Now, so not tons and tons of best friends, mm-hmm. but some really good friends. Mm-hmm. And this group that you're talking about, 6 Points group, that has been very, very important to me since we first got together, 8 years ago.
Okay. Now, what brought you together? Was it like an ad in the paper, like how bands form, like we're looking for a drummer, and they were like, we're looking for a sculptor to join us?
Wouldn't that be fun?
That would be good.
No, Mary Jo Karimina had gotten together a show over Crosstown, one of those galleries that was across the way. There were 2 going on at the same time, Belonging show and You Plus Me or 1 Plus 2, I don't know, something like that. Anyway, so a bunch of us. The idea was you went to that little flea market that used to be across the way and you bought something, and then you made art inspired by it or to it or with it or paint it, whatever you wanted to do. So I found this pretty good size ceramic piece that was of the fish. It was a vase, and I loved it. I couldn't figure out. I have a collection of Vajolica, so it reminded me of that kind of pottery. So I thought, I don't know what to do with this, but I like it, so I bought it. And so I ended up wrapping it with brown paper and then putting a tag on it as though it had been sold through an auction house. So here was the tag with the image on it. It said sold, and it told all about how tall and whatever. And it was all tied up with string. And I remember that Paula Kovarik was and I didn't know her, was so interested in that piece and she said, what kind of knots did you use? And I didn't know her and how she does stitching, and she's all involved in those kinds of things. And I said, I don't know, granny knots? I don't know. I didn't pay any attention to that. Well, so there were 6 of us that were at that show, and the lecture was the next day, so we went to that, and we were the ones that lingered after the whole thing. And somebody spoke up and said, we should get a group to talk about art. We should get a group. Well, I've been involved in people saying that and a group that's formed that way, but that usually doesn't last very long. And so, but I didn't know Paula. Paula's kind of a go-getter. And she said, okay, that sounds great. My house, 6 o'clock, next Monday. And we've been meeting ever since. So we are at the point now where we can talk about each other's artwork and not be afraid that we're going to offend or start a bunch of tears or any of that kind of thing. And we can be pretty forthright in our criticisms of the work. And we meet once a month and have since 8 years ago.
And who's in this group?
So it's Mary Jo, Paula Kovarik. It was Carrie Dugan, and then she and her family moved to Norway, and so we were 5 for a while. Also Jennifer Sargent and Carol McTire. Then Sharon Havelka became our 6th person after a while. So.
And part of me is like, how did Sharon get in there?
Sharon is Paula's sister-in-law.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah. So there was that connection.
I'd totally forgotten about that connection.
Yeah.
Okay. And so let me think about that group. Okay.
It's an awesome group.
Yeah. Oh,
it's
yeah.
An awesome group.
Yeah, for sure. And so what do you think? Like, I'm curious. Like, there's a part of me that's like, okay, Mary Kay, like, let's go down the list, and what does so and so do for the group, and what does so and so bring to the group? But part of me is just curious about the dynamic that you were talking about. Like, I have a vision in my head of what your group meetings might be like, but I would imagine I'm totally wrong. And so what do those meetings look like when you guys get together?
We meet at each other's homes, and there's always a studio, tour, visit, whatever going on. So this month, it's my turn to host the meeting. So I will prepare a dinner. Now, these folks are very specific. Vegetarian, gluten-free, dairy-free, no lemon, no chocolate. Seems like there's something else. Anyway, it's hard to plan a meal, actually, because I eat everything. But so we have a meal together, and it's simple. It's usually soup and salad because that's easy to do with all those dietary requirements. And then everybody troops into the studio or over to the studio or wherever it is, and we talk about what we've been doing, for the past month or the past 6 months, because it's been 6 months since I had a meeting at my house. So everybody talks about their work that is the most recent, and we ask for comments and questions. And if you were going to say an artist statement, what would it be? Here's mine, critique it,
And so I'm trying to make sure that I understood you right. So you were saying that you guys will, like, say, for example, go to your place. Mm-hmm. And so that night they're talking about you.
Right.
Okay.
And my work.
Yeah, right, sure.
It's just me. So when we first started, everybody brought a piece to the meeting, but that was cumbersome. You know,
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, because everybody's saying, oh, I'm doing this and this is why. Oh, I'm doing this and this is why. When we need to say, these are my works. I'm doing, you know, and you can see more than just one. So that it works out better to have it just your work at that time. Plus, you've got 6 months to come up with something new. Or different or ongoing.
And also, it's really great to see the studio.
Oh, yeah.
And to, you know,
always
poke around and see stuff.
Right.
And will you talk a little bit about, I mean, I don't necessarily want you to break down, like, what is it that Sharon brings to the group or anything like that. But I am curious. I mean, I've been to Carol's studio, and so I kind of have an idea of what Carol's studio is like. But first of all, will you describe your studio? I'm curious what your studio is like.
So the house that I live in now, which I've been there 30 plus years, we bought the house. We were in Germantown. Never did fit in there. So this is Cordova, but it's not the fancy part of Cordova. So we were looking at the time because my husband was going to be working out of our home. So we needed to have space for an office and also a studio space for him so he could shoot works and so forth. So we bought this house, which has a mother-in-law's wing. So it has 5 bedrooms. Yeah. And then a living room and what I call a dining platform because it's just a small area and then you step down. So it's that sunken living room kind of thing, but you know, it's a 70s house. That's ridiculous. It just means you walk down a step or up a step depending on which direction you're going in the house. So the mother-in-law's wing has 2 bedrooms and a bath, and then it's connected with the garage, a single-car garage. That was Paul's studio, and then one of the bedrooms was his office, and the other bedroom and the bathroom were that's where my son lived. I mean, that was the room. He could live other parts of the house too, and then there were 3 other bedrooms in the house. So it's a big space. Well, lots of rooms. It's not all that big. And when my son left finally, he was in graduate school, and I thought we'd have to, you know, take a broom and shoo him out of the house, but he finally went on his own. At one point, he said, "Mom, my roommates are going away. I need to, you know, come home and stay in my old room." I said, "I don't think so." I said, "It's my studio now." I said, "There's no space." Well, if he'd really needed to come home, he could have, of course, but he just needed to scurry around and find a new place to live, which he did within a week. That was not a problem. But so that bedroom that used to be his bedroom is now my studio. And it's small, but it works pretty well. I have space to work, and I can't make any of those 6 by 4 foot paintings easily in the place, but I have plenty of room for what I need to do. So.
And so you mentioned the family a couple of times, and I don't want to let that totally drop. And so one thing that's a reoccurring theme at my house is I'll do something, and then my children or stepchildren will respond, and I'll say, you know, I'll put it in the book, okay? Just put it in the book. And so what do you think if your kiddos were going to write a book, what do you think? How do you think they would describe life with you, with a mom who was a maker?
My son majored in geography and history and is now with Home Depot, and he designs bathrooms and kitchens. So that's sort of artistic, but he would never say he was artistic. My husband was that photographer. My daughter graduated from School of Visual Arts in Manhattan, and she's an artist. I can remember one time I had taken a figure drawing class at MCA. Maybe it was one of those teacher workshop kinds of things. Well, I think it was a regular class, once a week for a semester or whatever. And we had nude studies and so forth. So I had them all over the floor because I had to get my portfolio together to go for the critique. And Laura was fairly young at the time, maybe 4th grade, maybe. And I heard her come in with her little friend Ellen. And here were all these nude drawings all over the living room floor. And I heard Ellen say, Laura, what's with all these naked pictures all over the floor? And I thought, oh my gosh, the whole neighborhood's going to go berserk. But Laura just said, oh, that's my mom's stuff. Come on, let's get a drink and run outside or whatever. And that was the last I ever heard of that. So I don't know if anybody ever got an earful of the naked drawings in Mrs. VanGieson's house. I don't know, but I never heard anything about it. They're pretty, you know, I mean, it's just what mom does. It's just what mom does. My daughter understands more what I'm doing than my son does, but he's very kind and tries. I don't think, I'm not sure my husband ever understood it all. I mean, really, you know,
No.
And I know my mother didn't. I remember her saying one time, two things actually. She said, when she looked at my abstract drawings, paintings, whatever, she'd say, maybe someday you'll circle around until you do realism. Well, that wasn't going to happen. But then another time she said, I wish I could see how you think, which I thought was kind of interesting. Mm-hmm. So.
And now, I mean, part of the reason I asked that question is because I'm a parent, and I also know, just for the historical record, I understand that I am a het cis white man asking a mother what it's like to be a parent, but that is a question that I ask Pinckney and anybody else who happens to be a parent. It's not just moms, but I know that the job of moms is very different than the jobs of dads. Exactly. And I also know that the question being posed to a mom is very different and much more loaded and more complicated than being asked to a dad. I'm aware of this. Now my question is, I have a kid who's interested in art too, despite all of my great efforts to dissuade them from this. So what do you think? Like,
really?
What
Dissuade? Really?
Oh my God, yes. Anything but art. Jesus, Mary Kay, it's horrible. It's a horrible life.
No.
And so I'm curious, what's it like having a kid who's interested in art in the same way that you are? What are some of the good things? What are some of the bad things? I want to hear about this.
So, just a little funny. Early on, back in the day, in the 70s, when I was pregnant, you know, I read all these books. Okay. So we play these certain records and these songs even before the kid's born, you know, so they listen to this from the womb, you know, and they'll be artistic or whatever. The room that I created for both of the kids, wild. I mean, so exciting. Now, my son's ADHD, so all that stimulation was probably not the right thing, but I didn't know about that. When he was very young, I taped a piece of paper to his high chair and gave him ketchup. And he could finger paint with ketchup on the paper, which I think I still have someplace. But anyway, so I was trying to, you know, that's visual and that stimulation and that whatever, so finger painting, but with ketchup because it's non-toxic and maybe he wouldn't die from ketchup inhalation, you know. Didn't have to work at that so hard with my daughter. She took to it a little more. In fact, there was a whole scene that she drew behind her bed that I couldn't see from the doorway of her room until I pulled her bed out, and then I realized that she'd been making art all over the walls behind her bed, which at the time I was probably, oh my gosh, I can't believe you do this. Now we have to paint over it, you know. Now I would be more mellow and I'd say, here are some paints. Why don't you make it in color? But back then I probably didn't. The kids really, I mean, that's just what mom does. So as the difference between, my husband was all about, now this domestic stuff, he wasn't big into doing that. But he liked the play thing. So my daughter was interested in softball, so he was all about going to the practices, practicing with her. I mean, it was 13 years on the ball field, so, you know, there was a lot going on. he kept trying to find a sport that Chris would like, but Chris really wasn't ever interested. But they did a lot of things together. So my husband liked the fun part. Take them camping, all this kind of stuff. I said, you all go camping. I'll stay at the house and make art. We'll both be happy. So.
And then what about with Laura? How old is she?
She's 45.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so she's like a grown-up.
Oh, has been for years.
Well, and so what are those conversations like? I mean, because for me, as a parent, and as a teacher, one of the things that's really tricky for me, with having a kiddo who's interested in art, or something that I'm having trouble with right now, just because like now it's become apparent that this is a thing that my kiddo is really interested in, that Allie really wants to do. And so, like before, we would really just kind of play and just kind of have fun and make these drawings or whatever. But now I'm like, and we would go and see art, and I wouldn't really be like, oh, well now, look at the way this orange has been subdued, like that's why it's being pushed back in the background or whatever,
Right.
And so it was more like, I don't know, maybe it was not more fun, but maybe it wasn't like so teaching, or like so like, oh, okay, now I need to really like tell them stuff, like that kind of thing. And so maybe that's my problem. I'll talk about it with my shrink later. But like when you have those conversations with Laura, what kind of conversations are you guys having about art or thinking about art?
So she's a manager at Bonefish restaurant in Collierville. Not very artistically inspired as far as that goes, but she makes art on her own. But she's not made a lot of whatever you might say serious art lately. She will though. But we, for a good long period of time, we would take trips to various places to see particular artists. So in Chicago, they had because I was the teacher in charge of doing a Christmas tree for some festival of lights or something here in town. They had a drawing, and I won 2 free tickets to any place in the United States that I wanted to fly. That was awesome, except I sort of, I was teaching, and when are you going to go, and this kind of thing. So finally, at Thanksgiving, time was running out because the year was going to be over. So it was hard to decide who I was going to take as my second. Now, my husband traveled for years and years as part of his job. He didn't want anything to do with that. But my son might have liked to go. But anyway, finally it was determined that Laura and I would go to Chicago. And there was a big Monet retrospective on, huge paintings, and a lot of them, and they were gorgeous. And so we went to that. There were no tickets available, but it surprised my daughter. I said, we're going to go down and we're going to go down to the museum and see if we can, and we heard people were scalping those tickets for $200 a pop, which I thought was kind of cool that they were, you might expect that for an athletic event, but not necessarily for art event. So I thought, and Laura was just shocked. Mom, you're going to pay that kind of money? I said, no, we don't know. Anyway, we were standing in line, and this young man came along, and he had 2 tickets, and he said, do you need to buy tickets? I said, sure. I said, how much? $16.50 a piece. $16.50 a piece. That was the regular price. It wasn't, bumped up at all. I said, sure. I said, are they real? And the guard came along. He said, you can't do that here. So we got out of line and hid behind the building, and I bought his tickets, and we went in. And I was so excited to show her the whole room with the Monet's water lilies, which were, covering the walls in this room. And she was very impressed. So that was one of the first times we went any place. But we went to Kansas City, we went to Denver, we went to Palm Beach, we went New York several times, for these little trips, looking at artworks in museums. Yeah.
All right, let's go. Let's slide back to the six points.
Okay.
And so, so I've been to Carol's studio, but will you describe Carol's studio, Carol's setup for me? I'm curious about that.
Well, you saw it,
I
right?
know.
Yeah.
But the people who are listening haven't.
Okay, I forget about that. We're just not talking. So, Carol lives in a multi-generational house. So her daughter and son-in-law and the kids live in the same home with her. It's a big house. It's in Cordova. It's not too far from me, as a matter of fact. And she has taken over what probably was the dining room in the house. And she's put these sliding doors on, and she can close off those doors so children don't interrupt, or she can open them and invite them in. So she has, and then she has garage space too, because she does 3-dimensional pieces also, and so she saws and that kind of thing. But her works are very conceptual and just absolutely gorgeous, to my mind. I really like the way she thinks and how she produces. But she's got this big table, and she's got some storage space. I think maybe she stores things, and she's still teaching at Arlington. I think she stores a lot of things at school, which is an awesome place. That's an awesome resource. But she can make and do most anything. I truly think she can.
And what about Paula?
Oh, Paula has the most gorgeous studio you've ever seen. Oh my gosh. Now she started as a quilter. She draws with thread. She's got these machines and this big surface, and it's a free motion machine, so she doesn't plan it out. She doesn't draw on her fabric before she starts. She just starts going, which I think is amazing. She also cuts projects up, even projects that have been in shows. She decides, she doesn't need that anymore. So she cuts them up and makes them into new projects. She's gotten into some 3-dimensional pieces. That show that we had at UT Martin included some of her 3D pieces. She's amazing. And now I think she's upstate someplace, New York, someplace, at a retreat. So, yeah.
And then what about Sharon?
Sharon has taken over so much. So I think her kitchen, and then there's a dining area, but then there's also a large portion of a room that might have been the kitchen. I'm not sure, but she's got this huge table and then space to hang all her work and process. And she's a fiber artist also, and she stuffs things and cinches them up to make them dimensional. They're pretty awesome. With coffee filters, so I've got plenty of those since I save the one after each pot of coffee I make, so that works out well.
And one thing I think about when I think about your practice is how much there is a kind of like when I visualize you in the studio, there's a part of me that sees you have space where things sit and percolate, like no pun intended with the coffee filters, but where like you will find something and it'll have a kind of resonance for you, and maybe you don't totally know what it's going to be. Right. And sometimes, for me, this is me sort of projecting on you, sometimes just having that stuff around and letting it sit there, and then eventually its path will become clear, or it'll start to speak to you, or it'll say, of course, this is supposed to be that. Is there a space in your studio where you have these things that you've accumulated? And so like part of me is thinking like the yard tools, the textile materials, the like the coffee filters. Like, was it one of those things where you were just like, These are really beautiful. Like I love these coffee filters. I'm gonna have them, and I'm gonna start keeping them, and then I'll figure out where they go and how they fit. Am I thinking about that correctly?
I think so. You might call it a hoarding situation in another another thought. Because I do pick up things and save them and whatever. Not plants, because I have cats and they eat the plants, so can't do that. My cats do, yours might not. But they do kind of, hang out for a while. When I first started covering things, and I'm thinking of crocheted yarn, which I've covered a lot of things with crocheted yarn. Not like yarn bombing kind of thing. That I don't care for that. But although friends send me all those kinds of yarn bombed kinds of things. Ooh, here's a picture, Mary Kay. You'd love it. It's a fan, an overhead fan that's been covered with crocheted yarn. That's not it. But so I had a friend when I was in college. She was newly married. No money. So she wanted everything to match. She didn't have the money to buy things to match. So she just made covers for everything out of chintz material. So she made a little cover for the toaster and one for the coffee pot and one for the blender and all the, and the chair covers and the curtains and everything. So you walked in, it was a sea of chintz. And it was kind of overwhelming, and you thought, my gosh, what in the world possessed her to do that? But later on, I realized that if you do all that covering, you've made everything alike. It all matches. Nothing stands out. Nothing has its own opinion. Everything is kind of hidden, flaws and so forth. And that might be a statement on something she was trying to do, or I thought, maybe I could change something, the way it looks, the way you worked with it, the way you saw it, if I made a crochet covering for a branch and then attached a shovel to one end. You obviously can't use it as a shovel. It's not really a tree anymore either. So that was, those opposites or comparisons or non-comparisons.
And as you were talking about that, every once in a while when I do these interviews, someone will be talking about something, and then I'll be like, man, Hamlet, you totally let something drop a little while ago. And so that just happened in my brain. And so you have this group, the 6 points, and there aren't a lot of, I'm trying to think of it, there's not a lot of groups like this. To me, this seems really interesting. Mm-hmm. I know that for a while, I feel like I remember a story that Nancy Cheers told me, where Nancy had a group of mostly women that were her age that would get together and have dinner and kind of talk about things. And I know that that's a really important part of the sense of community that is more chosen, that's not necessarily like the random kind of community that begins to form at art openings, where people will hang out and kind of chat and visit. That's also kind of like can feel a little superficial, or not necessarily superficial, but just not super deep normally. But it seems like with the 6 points, one of the things that's super interesting for me about that is that it's a group that you have chosen, or that the 6 people have chosen. But I'm also really interested in how you feel like that group has added to your practice, or just added to your life as a person.
So I don't know if a bunch of guys would get together like this. I don't know if it's a male-female kind of thing. I don't know. Mm-hmm. I know I was in a group when I was in graduate school that was all women. We got together and we were supposed to do, we read papers and talked about critical kinds of things that were going on in the art world. The problem was with that group, there were several people in it who at one point seemed to maintain that all my opinions were wrong. So it wasn't a real fun group to be involved with if you don't have an opinion that's right, which opinions I thought were yours, you know. This group's totally different from that, and it makes me look forward to meeting with everybody, but also makes me, left to my own devices, I would just go after any shiny object, like I was saying before. This way it helps me focus. So I want to find a cohesive group of work, maybe, to show at the next meeting. There's a deadline of sorts. So it's not like it's a show that I'm going to have, but it's like, here's show and tell, and I should have something to show and tell. And since these are people that I respect and I love, and I know that they respect me, so they're going to consider that when they talk about my work. Not that they would hold back and say, oh, this is great, this is great, this is great, when it's not. You know, they would tell me if they didn't think it was worthwhile. But they would never tell me not to pursue it. So there's a book you may have heard of, Big Magic, Elizabeth Gilbert. I don't know what you think about the book. Her books are not my favorite. Somebody gave me that copy. And the thing that I got from that was, if I remember correctly, she kind of has the idea that ideas flit around like butterflies, and maybe one lands on your shoulder, and if you accept that butterfly, that idea, then everything's golden. Don't know that I think that's how it works. A friend of mine gave that to me, and I read it. I don't know. But I don't think that's how ideas come to you. I think, because that ignores all the work that you've put into all the stuff you've been making prior to that. Just the butterfly flying out of the thing. Woo, here's this great, you know. Now, I think some revelation comes across you if you're working through a problem and you finally, oh, that's what I'll do. That'll make this perfect if I do that. But I'm not sure that's the butterfly. So those ideas, I think, come to you as a result of work. I think you can be inspired by a shadow or a cloud or something like that, or somebody else's work. But I think the work that you've done beforehand has a lot to say, how the process is going, you know, your vision, etc.
Yeah, I mean, I can imagine all that one would get out of those meetings. I mean, you know, like you were saying, a deadline, but also camaraderie, also that thing that you were talking about, the inspiration of being around these other people.
Right.
You know, and also thinking about how people need that, like in that sociology class I had in college, the guy said, people need people to be human, and how important that is in terms of just being around other people and maintaining that friend group and that core group.
I think it's hard I don't think you can create art in a void. I think you have to be inspired by things around you, people around you, you know, happenings. So after my husband died, I had heard people say, "Oh, just pour all your grief into making art." Just I've heard that since too. That's not the way it happened with me. I had a space of about 5 years after he died where I produced next to nothing that I thought was worthwhile. Now, I was teaching, so, you know, I did those kinds of things. I'd been in graduate school. That prompted me to do a lot of work on my own after that. But then, all of a sudden, his death just really took me aback. And it was kind of a 5-year dry period. And then a friend invited me to show my work here in town. and that kind of jump started everything. And then after that, I met the Six Points folks. So I mean, we formed that group. But the trauma, and I think about it now. Every now and then, I think, why didn't I pour that grief into artwork? I just couldn't do it. I couldn't think. I think was part of it. So I redecorated the house. You know, I painted all the rooms and took up the flooring and stuff. So that filled in the time and the space.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I don't necessarily have a follow-up question to that, but I think something that you touched on that's really important a lot in this interview is how your decisions to do things aren't necessarily what other folks might have suggested, or are done. But I think, it doesn't invalidate the things that you did. I mean, to me, that kind of trauma is really real and really powerful. And I think we all sort of deal with things in our own way. I know a lot of people who have experienced great trauma like that, and for sure there's no way to do it. There's no, this thing about the different stages of grief is all
right.
Crazy BS stuff, because it's like, well, yes, in theory that's wonderful, but then if you experience all of those stages of grief in the same day, then are you doing it wrong? Like that kind of thing.
So grief doesn't go away; it lasts forever. So
right.
There you go.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And then you said that you have something that is on your phone that you wanted to read.
Yes.
What is this?
Yes. So I don't know if this is an artist statement or.
I like this idea.
I don't know.
It's like a prepared statement.
We have to, the teacher and me, I had
Kay
notes.
has prepared a statement that she will read to us now.
Yes, exactly. So, and I've used this in any number of ways, but it took me a while to come to these kinds of decisions and what I would pare down to say about me and my art.
Okay.
So here it goes. I am what I have learned. I remember to light the candles. I never regret. If the horse dies, I get off. I don't postpone joy. I know that grief lasts forever and that life should abrade. That's my statement.
And then I'm just going to do the horrible thing and ask you, wait, what does the word abrade mean?
So to rough up.
Okay. Yeah, I like that.
So there should be some remnants of life, like on the handle of the arm of the chair where somebody sat, or the light switch, or there should be something left over from a life.
Now, I mean, one of the things I really love about that statement is how you don't explain anything.
I can.
Which as a teacher, I love when you don't explain things. But also, just like your work, it's so rich in terms of metaphor and in terms of being this kind of poetic language. Which leads me to another question. P.S. I think we're doing okay on time.
Okay.
Yeah, we're good. We got like 10 minutes.
Oh.
Now, where do you think this understanding, this deep, what I see is a really deep understanding of metaphor being sort of hardwired into your practice, where do you think that understanding of metaphor comes from?
I don't know exactly how to answer that question, except that, I say, I am what I have learned.
Right.
So, that kind of thing.
Now, has reading been a really important part in your practice?
I'm a big reader.
I mean, we will have to argue about Melissa Gilbert later, but that's okay. Don't worry about it. But now, what have been some things that have been important to you in terms of thinking about reading?
So I read for pleasure and for fun, but I also read to learn about artists or learn about, those kinds of things too. I read every night before I go to sleep. People say that's not what you're supposed to do. That interrupts the sleep. Maybe it does, but that's the way I miss it if I don't read. So I have books that mostly fiction, but not always. But I'm a big reader. So.
And has that always been the case? That's been something that you've done kind of from the beginning?
I've always read.
And what about poetry? Are you interested in that?
Some. I have to say that out loud, though. I have to read poems out
Yeah,
loud.
yes. Hell yeah, we just high five. Yeah, I mean, I think that's the
you
way
have
you're
to.
supposed to do it. And Shakespeare, you're supposed to read
Sure,
out loud.
sure.
Yeah. And then, so what kind of things in terms of thinking about poetry? What stands out if I was like, man, I want to get into poetry? What should I read? What would you recommend?
K. Ryan.
Okay.
Do you know K. Ryan?
No, which is great. I'm going to add that to the queue.
You should know K. Ryan.
Okay, now what's going on there? What's good?
Her very readable. I mean, when you read them, they are beautiful. And that's where I got the line that life should abrade is directly from her. But I mean, she talks about kind of everyday things like lifting a ladder, but that's not really a ladder. It's life or somebody, being lifted up. She's awesome. She's awesome. But they're not poems that go on forever. They're short poems. Some poetry, it's like, are you sure this is prose? Poetry, kind of thing.
Right. Any others that really stand out that you feel would be
I wrote those down too.
Well, yeah. What else you got written down over there?
I got a whole bunch of stuff. So Mary Oliver, everybody loves her. Billy Collins, I like him too. So yeah.
Now, what is it about Mary Oliver that you really like?
Well, I think she touches on so many things that relate to people, but maybe to women too. So yeah.
She has a bunch of really good interviews that she did with Krista Tippett for On Being, and you can totally hear her smoking.
Oh, really?
Yeah, you can hear her like lighting up. You can hear the inhale.
Funny.
You can hear the exhale. Yeah, my partner is a big fan of Mary Oliver's, and so we have a lot of those Mary Oliver books at the house. Yeah. And then the last one that you mentioned was Billy Collins.
Right.
What is it about Billy? Because I also like his poems.
Right.
I think I maybe have 2 books of his.
I don't know that I could cite anything in particular. He was like the poet, whatever, of the year, or I don't know, whatever that was. I just like his take on a lot of things, the direction he goes and so forth. So I can't really tell you a poem that I love more than anything else, but
well, it's okay. I mean, for me, one of the things that I would love to be one of those people who could just be like, oh, well, yeah, there's this one Billy Collins refrain that I really love, with the cadence. I would not be able to do that with anybody except maybe Shel Silverstein, because we had to memorize those when I was a kid.
The sidewalk.
Yeah, or the refrigerator, the polar bear and the Frigidaire. I think that might be the only poem. Aside from maybe a couple of Anne Sexton or Sharon Olds poems
How about Dr. Seuss? You could hop on Pop.
Yeah, those are. Well, those I have memorized because of my kids.
Right.
And my daughter, when we would drive, I would have to have these books, and most of the books that I had memorized were Sandra Boynton, and she was. But anyway, that's another story. But for me, the thing about poetry that I like is that thing that you were talking about, where like a line will stand out, and that's where the line, things will abrade comes from, or whatever.
Right.
To me, of course, there's a wonderful twist of phrase that happens in a line, and a great way of putting something down that we maybe haven't been able to verbalize in other ways that says that thing that we've been.
So if you're a writer or a poet or whatever, and you find that perfect phrase, please only use it once. Don't use it 16 times. I'm going, really? You're using that again? We heard that once and it was so awesome, and now it's diminished.
I'm trying to remember. There was one book. I can't remember who it was. I know that I texted my sister about it, and I was like, this guy mentions forelock 8 times in this book. And they were like, because I do the thing where I will read a book all the way through, and not in one sitting, but usually like 3 or 4 sittings. Yeah. And so when those things happen, it really stands out.
Right.
But yeah, you're right. Every once in a while, they'll be like, oh, this is a good move. And then they'll just hit it. But at some point you would think like your editor or your buddy somebody would be like, dude, you've mentioned a forelock like 8 times in this book. And are there other things, like you were talking about reading and poetry and how important those were? Are there other aspects of your life that are particularly important in terms of thinking about your studio practice?
So I am a storyteller. I belong to the Memphis Storytellers League, which was which started in 1923 or something. I mean, it's been going on forever. I'm one of the younger members, which is kind of scary, actually. Uh-oh.
That's all right.
But so for that, because we tell stories to one another and out in the community and so forth, I write stories too. To that, and just because. So writing those stories, telling those stories. I can't memorize, so I storyboard my stories. So they're all kind of my hieroglyphics, my little drawings and so forth that help me remember the story, because I can't memorize. So hence that's why I've got my notes on my phone. So that and the Urban Sketchers, I enjoy that group too. That's another social kind of thing, but a different way of looking. Some people have said, well, how do those sketches that you do on the outings that you go with the Urban Sketchers, how does that inform your other artwork? I think just being out and about informs it. I'm not sure that I would ever take a sketch of, I don't know, some coffee shop someplace where we might be sketching and make a three-dimensional piece of it. I don't know that that's ever going to happen, or even a painting, but it makes you look and see, and that's influential just in its own. So the light, the way the shadows are, so forth.
Well, our alarm went off.
I know.
Thank you for coming in and hanging out with me again.
We had millions of time here.
I know. We did. We went through 2 hours. That was 2 hours.
I really wish I hadn't had that coughing attack there, but
it's totally fine. We'll just edit that out.
I hope.
Thank you for coming in.
Oh, thank you.
And that was the second of 2 interviews that I did with the amazing Mary K VanGieson. That interview was recorded on April 5th, 2024. Please join us next week when we have another interview. Until then, thank you so much for listening.